Yesterday, an incident unfolded upon the open sea that held significance far beyond the fate of one solitary vessel. It represented a pointed exchange, a communique delivered between two of the planet's most formidable nations. Authorities from the United States took possession of an oil tanker connected to Russia, acting under the provisions of their own sanctions legislation. In a matter of hours, Moscow delivered its reply, condemning the maneuver as illegitimate and issuing a warning that it possessed the capacity to heighten international strains. So, what truly lies at the core of this event? Is it merely an exercise in legal oversight, or does it mark the opening of another theater within the expanding geopolitical confrontation between Washington and Moscow? In this presentation, we will meticulously examine the rationale behind the American claim of legality, explore the reasons for Russia's vehement opposition, and consider the ramifications for worldwide trade, energy markets, and global equilibrium. By the conclusion, you will be equipped to arrive at your own verdict. Was this a simple act of law enforcement or a deliberate signal in a much deeper contest for power? Today, we are analyzing a substantial development within the intricate relationship of U.S.-Russia relations. The United States has commandeered a tanker linked to Russian interests, utilizing its established sanctions framework as justification. Russia has pushed back with considerable force, describing the action as unlawful and potentially disruptive to stability. This is not merely another passing headline. It engages with critical themes of global energy security, the application of international law, and the perpetual balancing act between influential states. Let us deconstruct precisely what occurred, why it holds importance, and what potential scenarios may follow. According to formal declarations, U.S. officials halted and subsequently seized an oil tanker navigating in international waters. The American position is unequivocal. The vessel was tied to Russian commercial networks and was reportedly participating in activities that violated standing sanctions. Consequently, under U.S. law, enforcement action was deemed appropriate. Washington maintains that sanctions are not symbolic gestures. If a company, ship, or network is found to be circumventing them, authorities possess both a right and a responsibility to act. From the vantage point of the United States, this was a procedural and legal undertaking. Moscow reacted with notable intensity. Russian officials depicted the seizure as a breach of international customs, a perilous precedent for maritime affairs, and a step that could apply additional pressure to relations already under significant tension. Russia also placed emphasis on the treatment of the ship's personnel, calling for unwavering respect for legal processes, humane and transparent handling, and strict observance of international maritime standards. For the leadership in Moscow, this was not just a technical or legal issue. It was interpreted as a political signal with broader intentions. To properly comprehend this circumstance, we must first grasp the mechanism of sanctions. Sanctions are legal and economic restrictions imposed by one country or a coalition of nations to apply pressure, curtail financial activity, or discourage specific behaviors without resorting to direct military engagement. In recent years, the energy, banking, and shipping sectors associated with Russia have encountered extensive limitations from the United States and its allies. The American argument is fundamentally simple. If sanctions are ignored or bypassed, their enforcement becomes meaningless. Russia's counter-argument is similarly straightforward. Utilizing domestic laws to appropriate foreign-linked assets in international waters serves to undermine trust in the established rules of global trade. This is the precise point where jurisprudence and geopolitics violently collide. Petroleum is never solely a matter of business. It functions simultaneously as a source of energy, a form of economic leverage, an instrument of political influence, and a reservoir of strategic power. When a tanker is intercepted, global markets observe closely. Marine insurance providers reevaluate risk profiles, and logistics corporations adopt a more cautious posture. Even one isolated enforcement action can generate ripple effects throughout the system: uncertainty in pricing, delays within supply chains, and amplified strain in markets that are already fragile. Therefore, while this may resemble a single, contained case, its potential impact is genuinely worldwide. Beyond the realm of governments and policies, there are actual human beings involved. The crew aboard the tanker included workers hailing from multiple countries. Russia publicly stressed the critical importance of legal protections, humane treatment, and due process for these individuals. This stands as a vital reminder that within geopolitical disputes, ordinary workers frequently become the most affected parties, despite having no voice or role in the political decisions that created the situation. Commentators and analysts generally perceive two possible interpretations of this event. The first is the law enforcement view. The United States is simply executing its existing regulations, and sanctions can only be effective if violations carry tangible consequences. The second is the strategic signaling view. For Russia, this is not purely about compliance. It is perceived as a deliberate message that external pressure is mounting, not subsiding. Both of these interpretations can coexist simultaneously, and when they do, diplomatic management of the resulting tensions becomes exponentially more difficult. This event did not happen within a void. Relations between the United States and Russia are already profoundly strained due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, the politics of energy, and long-standing security disagreements. Each new confrontation adds another layer of mutual distrust, making compromise and dialogue progressively more challenging to achieve. You might be asking yourself, why should anyone outside these two nations take an interest? The answer lies in the interconnected nature of global stability. When major powers engage in public clashes, energy markets tend to become more volatile. International shipping encounters, higher perceived risk, and economic uncertainty begins to spread. This can directly influence fuel prices, the cost of conducting trade, and long-term investment decisions across multiple regions and continents. What transpires between superpowers very rarely remains confined solely to them. Different audiences across the globe are hearing substantially different stories. Within the United States, the narrative emphasizes sanctions enforcement and the assertion of legal authority. Within Russia, the narrative focuses on unlawful pressure and political provocation. The underlying reality is considerably more intricate. This incident resides in the space where international law, national policy, and global power dynamics intersect and overlap. Understanding that inherent complexity is essential, especially in an era characterized by rapid headlines and increasingly polarized narratives. Specialists suggest several plausible paths forward from this point. One involves quiet diplomacy, utilizing back-channel communications to prevent any further escalation. Another entails legal disputes, with challenges being mounted within international or maritime legal frameworks. A third path points toward tighter controls, meaning stricter enforcement of existing sanctions and more vigilant monitoring of global shipping networks. This clearly indicates the issue is far from concluded. It constitutes a single episode within a longer ongoing process that will actively shape the future of U.S.-Russia relations. This was not merely about one oil tanker. For the United States, it epitomizes the legal enforcement of its sanctions regime. For Russia, it raises profound concerns regarding sovereignty and the integrity of international norms. For the rest of the international community, it serves as a potent reminder that global power struggles invariably exert an influence on trade, energy security, and economic stability everywhere. How these pivotal moments are navigated and managed will shape not only the future of diplomacy, but also the everyday realities of markets worldwide. One of the most hotly debated aspects of this incident concerns the question of jurisdiction at sea. International waters are governed by a complex blend of maritime conventions, the authority of a vessel's flag state, and domestic laws that nations sometimes apply beyond their own borders. In specific instances, the United States argues that when a vessel is implicated in sanction violations, money laundering, or prohibited trade networks, it possesses the legal right to intervene under its own statutes. Russia, however, contests this interpretation vigorously. From Moscow's perspective, applying national legislation to a foreign-linked vessel on the high seas weakens the shared legal framework upon which all global shipping depends. This fundamental disagreement highlights a deeper issue. There exists no single supreme enforcement authority over the oceans. Powerful states often resort to their own legal systems to take action, and it is at this juncture that legal interpretation transforms into a political instrument. The domain of energy remains one of the most sensitive arenas in global politics. Oil and gas do not simply fuel economies, they actively shape alliances, determine trade routes, and provide diplomatic leverage. For the United States and its partners, sanctions targeting energy networks are designed to limit the revenue streams that could support activities they oppose. For Russia, energy exports constitute a critical component of national income and a primary source of international influence. When an oil tanker becomes the focal point of an enforcement action, it sends a signal that extends far beyond that single shipment, a signal directed at exporters, insurers, shipping companies, and nations reliant on energy imports. The message is unequivocal. Energy is not separate from geopolitics, it is one of its central instruments. International shipping depends fundamentally on predictability. When vessels can move freely under a set of shared and respected rules, trade flows with maximum efficiency. When enforcement actions become more frequent or are perceived as politically motivated, the entire calculus of risk changes. Shipping firms may respond by avoiding certain routes, increasing their insurance premiums, or reducing their exposure to politically sensitive cargoes. These operational adjustments inevitably affect delivery timelines, transportation expenses, and ultimately the prices paid by consumers. This elucidates why even a single maritime dispute can hold significance far beyond the countries directly involved. It influences how the entire global commercial ecosystem evaluates stability and risk. Not every geopolitical confrontation is managed in the public eye. While official statements may project firmness and resolve, a substantial portion of the genuine work occurs quietly through dedicated diplomatic channels, confidential legal consultations, and behind-the-scenes negotiations. In many historical disputes between major powers, public rhetoric and private dialogue have followed distinctly separate trajectories. Governments frequently aim to defend their positions publicly while working diligently in private to prevent a dangerous escalation. Whether this incident evolves into a protracted dispute or gradually recedes into the background may depend less on public headlines and more on what is communicated away from the cameras and microphones. Every major enforcement action of this nature establishes a precedent. If one nation can seize or restrict a foreign-linked vessel under its own domestic laws, other states may feel empowered to follow a similar approach in the future. This trajectory could lead to a more fragmented system of maritime governance, a greater reliance on unilateral national authority, and diminished confidence in shared international frameworks. Some analysts warn that this trend risks making global trade dangerously politicized. Others counter that assertive enforcement is absolutely necessary to ensure rules are respected. The pivotal question is one of balance. How can nation-states enforce their laws without simultaneously undermining the stability of the very international system upon which they all depend for prosperity and security? In the landscape of modern geopolitics, narratives carry weight comparable to actions. Governments are engaged in constant communication with their domestic citizens, their international partners, and the global media apparatus. Each side deliberately frames the same event through its own distinct lens. One emphasizes legality and the necessity of enforcement. The other highlights sovereignty and the imperative of fairness. For viewers, listeners, and readers, this creates a significant challenge. How does one separate verifiable fact from strategic interpretation? Comprehending global events in the contemporary era demands more than consuming a single headline or report. It requires actively comparing perspectives, recognizing inherent biases, and examining the underlying interests at play. This incident represents something greater than a ship, its cargo, or legal process. It embodies the persistent tension between national authority and international systems, underscores the role of energy as a component of global power, and illustrates the fragile balance between lawful enforcement and risky escalation. For the United States, it reinforces the principle that established rules must be actively upheld. For Russia, it fuels concerns about fairness, jurisdiction, and the application of political pressure. For the international community at large, it highlights how deeply interconnected the realms of trade, law, and geopolitics have become. The genuine outcome will not be decided in a single day or through one official statement. It will be shaped gradually by ongoing diplomacy, nuanced legal interpretation, market responses, and future policy choices. What remains certain is this. In a world characterized by rising international competition, even a single tanker can transform into a powerful symbol of the much larger forces currently shaping our era. When geopolitical tensions impact the spheres of shipping and energy, the consequences almost never remain limited to governmental actors. Financial markets react with speed to any emerging uncertainty. Energy prices can experience sudden fluctuations, currency values may shift, and investor confidence can weaken in regions perceived as linked to the dispute. Businesses that depend on stable and predictable supply chains frequently encounter increased costs, logistical delays, or new contractual risks. For everyday consumers, this can translate into rising prices at the pump or reduced availability of certain goods. This is a clear demonstration of how policy decisions made at the highest levels of statecraft ultimately influence everyday economic realities, even in countries geographically far removed from the original point of contention. Major powers rarely undertake significant actions without careful consideration of how those actions will be interpreted on the global stage. For the United States, enforcing sanctions also communicates a message of deterrence, that rules are meant to be followed, and that violations will incur consequences. For Russia, public and forceful opposition to the seizure serves a different strategic purpose: to signal resilience, to reassure domestic audiences, and to demonstrate to the international community that external pressure will not go unanswered. This exchange, therefore, is not solely about law. It is equally about signaling intentions, testing limits, and attempting to shape the future behavior of the other party. While the primary focus rests on Washington and Moscow, numerous other countries are observing these developments with close attention. Allies of the United States may view this action as a reaffirmation of policy consistency or as a reminder of how seriously sanctions enforcement is taken. Nations that maintain working relationships with both sides are likely to adopt a posture of pronounced caution. They may deliberately avoid taking strong public positions while privately reassessing the potential risks to their own trade interests, diplomatic standing, and regional stability. In the theater of global politics, public silence often reflects careful and calculated deliberation rather than simple indifference. International law is built upon a foundation of treaties, conventions, and principles of mutual recognition. However, its practical enforcement remains largely dependent on the will and capability of national governments. When domestic laws are applied extraterritorially, legal debates inevitably intensify. Where does national jurisdiction legitimately begin and end? How should conflicts between national rules and international norms be properly resolved? And who ultimately possesses the authority to decide what is lawful in contested real-world situations? These questions do not possess simple or universally accepted answers. They reflect the challenging reality of a world where legal authority is shared, frequently overlapping, and sometimes directly disputed. This particular case vividly illustrates how the architecture of global governance can become fragmented when powerful political interests collide. Another concern for the long term is the potential normalization of confrontation. If actions perceived as confrontational become routine occurrences, what was once considered exceptional may gradually become accepted as standard practice. This could lead to a future with more frequent maritime inspections and seizures, increased politicization of ordinary trade flows, and reduced confidence in the idea of a neutral commercial space. Some experts argue that firm and consistent enforcement is precisely what maintains international order. Others caution that an over-reliance on such coercive measures can, over time, erode the very system of rules they are intended to protect. The enduring challenge for statesmen lies in preventing dangerous escalation while still upholding the rules they have championed. Modern commercial shipping no longer operates in obscurity. With the advent of persistent satellite monitoring, sophisticated digital tracking systems, and advanced data analytics, vessel movements are easier than ever to follow. The origins of cargo can be traced with greater accuracy, and compliance with complex regulations can be assessed in near real time. This technological environment undoubtedly makes enforcement actions more effective and targeted. However, it also renders them more transparent and consequently more contested. Every official action is now documented, scrutinized, and debated across the public domain. As surveillance and tracking technologies continue to advance, disputes over jurisdiction, transparency, and accountability are likely to become more frequent and more complex. History offers a clear lesson. Competition between major powers has often played out through the instruments of trade restrictions, resource control, and legal or economic pressure rather than through direct military conflict. From the economic measures of earlier eras to the sophisticated sanctions regimes of the present day, the pattern remains remarkably consistent. Economic tools are routinely transformed into instruments of strategic influence. What has changed in the contemporary world is the scale, the speed, and the global visibility of these actions. This recent incident fits neatly into a long tradition of utilizing non-military means to project power and assert interests while attempting to avoid the precipice of open confrontation. At its very core, this event reflects a world undergoing a significant transition. The global systems that were built upon a foundation of shared rules and mutual benefit are being increasingly tested by resurgent national interests and strategic competition. Economic interdependence remains a powerful force, yet political trust between major actors is notably fragile. For policymakers, the paramount challenge is maintaining a degree of international stability while simultaneously defending their national positions. For the global business community, the challenge is effectively managing the resulting uncertainty. For the general public, it is the crucial task of understanding that global politics is not a distant abstraction. It actively and tangibly shapes job markets, energy costs, and the conditions of daily life. This was never just about a tanker. It was and is about authority, influence, and the contested future of international cooperation. As strategic competition between major powers continues to define this era, moments like this may well become not the rare exception, but one of the defining features of our time. How do you personally perceive this evolving situation? Was it fundamentally a legal action, or does it signal a deeper and more consequential geopolitical shift? Please share your thoughts and reflections respectfully in the comment section below. If you found this comprehensive breakdown informative and useful, we would be grateful if you liked the video and subscribe to the channel for more fact-based neutral analysis.